What would you do if your father disowned you for carrying the only part left of the boy you loved? That was the moment everything in my life changed. Not the pregnancy test, not the diagnosis, not even the funeral. It was that moment when my father looked me in the eyes, a man I'd once believed would walk through fire for his children, and told me I was no longer his daughter. My name's Olivia Jenkins. I'm 34 now, but back then I was 17 and about to learn just how conditional, unconditional love could be. I grew up in Hartford, Connecticut in one of those picture-perfect families people envy from the outside. Our house had the white picket fence, the 4 bedrooms, the blooming hydrangeas that my mother obsessively trimmed every Sunday after church. My father, Robert Jenkins, wasn't just a man in town, he was the man. A respected contractor who built his company from the ground up, a community leader, a church elder. And in our house, a quiet authority no one dared question. My mother, Diana, was every bit the ideal church wife. Sweet smiling, always dressed just so, with homemade pie in the oven and perfectly set dinner tables. She had a gentle laugh that could calm a storm, except when it came to disappointing Dad. And then there was Michael, my older brother by 2 years, and the golden child from the moment he entered the world. He was the quarterback valedictorian youth group leader, an apple of my father's eye. That's my boy Dad would beam at every football game, his voice echoing louder than the crowd. And me, I was the good girl in the background, the one who never missed curfew, got straight A's, played piano, and tried desperately to be seen. Not as a shadow of Michael, but as someone worth noticing on her own. But none of that mattered after I met James Wilson. It was junior year English, and our teacher paired us up for a project on Romeo and Juliet. Ironic in hindsight, but James. He wasn't like other boys. He didn't flirt. He didn't brag. He listened. The first time we studied together at the library, we talked for 3 hours and barely touched our assignment. "You're different, Olivia," he told me, brushing a stray curl behind my ear. "You see things most people miss." James volunteered at the animal shelter. He wrote poetry he never showed anyone. He played the cello like his soul lived in the strings. His hands, long and elegant, moved across the instrument like magic. And when he played for me, it was like hearing the inside of his heart. We fell in love the slow way, the real way, no games, no pressure. Just 2 kids in love with art, with hope, with a future we thought we could build together. James got into Juilliard with a partial scholarship. I'd been accepted to NYU's nursing program. We dreamed about getting an apartment together after freshman year, taking weekend trips upstate, building a life filled with music medicine and messy little dreams. Even our parents approved on the surface, at least. My dad would chuckle and say, "James is the only boy I trust around my daughter. If only he knew." Because just after graduation, the world dropped out from under us. James started feeling sick. Bruises that didn't fade, nosebleeds, bone-deep fatigue. We thought it was just stress. College apps, recitals, final exams. But then came the diagnosis. Acute myeloid leukemia, aggressive, advanced, terminal. I still remember sitting in that sterile white hospital room, clutching James's hand as the doctor explained the treatment options. I was 17. James was barely 18. And we were being told our lives would never be the same. James was calm in a way that made me want to scream. He asked all the right questions while I sat there, tears slipping silently down my cheeks. Later, when we were alone, he finally broke. "I'm not afraid of dying," he whispered, voice cracking. "I'm afraid of leaving nothing behind." That's when the idea first surfaced, not from recklessness, but from love. "I want to leave something of myself in this world," he said one night, his frail fingers curling around mine. "I want to give you a part of me. Something that lives on." We didn't rush into the decision. It wasn't about lust. It was about legacy, about creating life before his was gone. 2 months later, I found out I was pregnant. I should have been terrified, and I was. But I was also full of something else, purpose. A part of James would live on, but I knew what this would mean for my parents, for the church, for the image they clung to like armor. I planned to tell them gently, after James stabilized from his latest treatment round. I thought maybe if they saw the truth behind my choice, they'd understand. But life doesn't wait for perfect timing. One evening, I came home from the hospital to find my parents sitting at the dining room table. The light above them cast harsh shadows. Between them, the pregnancy test I had hidden in the back of my drawer. "Sit down, Olivia," my father said. His voice wasn't loud, but it held the finality of a judge. I sat. My stomach twisted into knots. I barely opened my mouth before he slammed his fist on the table. "What have you done?" I tried. I tried to explain. I told them about James's cancer, about the love behind our decision. I pleaded, but it didn't matter. "You've brought shame to this family," my father seethed. "To our church, to our name. Fix this problem, or leave. Fix this problem." As if the child inside me, the piece of James I was clinging to, was nothing more than a mistake to be erased. "I won't do that," I whispered, my voice shaking. "This baby is all I have left of him." That's when Michael walked in, timing as perfect as ever. "Seriously, Olivia?" He scoffed, eyes narrowed. "Do you have any idea what this'll do to Dad's reputation?" To the business, I looked at my brother, the one I'd assumed would at least hear me out. He didn't. None of them did. And my mother. The woman who once kissed my bruises and sang me lullabies, she said nothing. She wouldn't even look at me. But the worst moment, it was when I stood up, duffel bag in hand, and my father pointed toward the door. "If you walk out with that shame, you're no longer my daughter." I turned back once. "You stopped being my father the moment you made me choose between love and shame," I said, and stepped into the darkness with nothing but my baby and a promise. The night I walked away from the only home I'd ever known, I had nowhere to go, just a beat-up Honda Civic, a duffel bag of clothes, and a child growing inside me. I didn't cry until I pulled into the hospital parking lot, where James lay fighting for every breath. There in the driver's seat, I finally broke. I had just turned 18, homeless, pregnant, alone, and terrified. James's parents, Ellen and Thomas Wilson, had always been kind. When I called and told them what had happened, they didn't hesitate. "Come here," Ellen said firmly. "You're staying with us now." Their guest room became my lifeline. But even that safety net had its limits. They were spending every cent on James's treatments. The insurance barely covered the basics. They were drowning, but still found room for me. That's the kind of love I had never known from my own blood. James was growing weaker by the day. The chemotherapy had ravaged his body. He was barely recognizable, pale, sunken, yet somehow more radiant than ever. I didn't tell him the full story right away. I couldn't bear to burden him, but he saw through me like always. My parents found out I whispered one night holding his fragile hand. They gave me a choice, the baby or a home. He closed his eyes, pain flashing across his face, not from the cancer, but from the guilt. "I did this to you." "No," I said fiercely. "We did this, out of love. This baby is hope, not shame." He tried to sit up, groaning softly with the effort. "Then let me talk to them." "They won't listen," I said. "They've already decided I'm a liar, a disappointment, a problem to be erased." James just nodded, his strength fading again. "Promise me," he murmured. "You'll keep the baby safe. Tell them who I was." "I promise," I whispered, tears falling. "Every day they'll know everything about you." That was the last time he was fully lucid. Later that afternoon, he slipped into unconsciousness again, his body too exhausted to continue the fight. I stayed by his side for hours, holding his hand, feeling each fragile breath like it was a countdown. When I returned to the Wilsons' house to gather more clothes, my father was there, sitting in my old driveway, arms crossed, as if waiting to reclaim control. "So you've made your decision," he said coldly. "You made it for me," I replied, heart pounding. "You're choosing disgrace," he spat. "Your child is born of sin." "No," I shot back, voice steady now. "He's born of love, something you apparently know nothing about." Michael appeared then, blocking my path to the door. I went through your phone, he said, smug. No mention of cancer, no doctor's notes, no evidence. My breath caught. You violated my privacy. You're obviously lying, Michael said. We needed to know the truth I laughed bitterly. The truth is none of you ever asked. You'd rather believe I'm some rebellious, ungrateful kid than believe I made a choice with more love and grief in it than you'll ever understand. They didn't respond, just stood there, my father glaring. Michael smug, my mother silent in the background, like a shadow with no voice of her own. I shoved past them and left. That night, James regained consciousness for one final lucid moment. His hand trembled as he reached beneath his pillow and pulled out a small, worn velvet box. Inside was a silver ring with a sapphire stone. My grandmother's, he whispered. I was going to propose properly, but this is all I have left. I slid it onto my finger as his eyes filled with tears. I love you, Olivia Jenkins, he said, voice steadier than it had been in weeks. Since Romeo and Juliet. Always. Those were the last words he ever said to me. James Wilson passed away just before sunrise, his parents at his side, and me holding his hand until the very end. I was 19, widowed in everything but law, carrying a child who would never meet his father. The funeral was a blur. I stood beside Ellen and Thomas, visibly pregnant now, as whispers floated around me like smoke. Such a shame. Teen drama. She must have trapped him. The church elders, the same ones who shook my father's hand every Sunday, refused to even meet my gaze. My parents didn't attend. Michael didn't send a word. I was no longer a daughter, no longer a sister, just a scandal walking through grief. 2 weeks later, I got a letter from the hospital. James had signed up for an experimental treatment trial. On the paperwork, he had listed me as his fiancée. They were sending me a small check, $3,000, as a token of appreciation. It wasn't much, but to me it meant food diapers and maybe a few weeks of safety. Shortly after I went into premature labor, Ellen rushed me to the hospital, her own eyes red from mourning, but fierce with purpose. James would have wanted me to be here, she said, gripping my hand as I screamed through the contractions. 26 hours later, Ethan James Jenkins entered the world, 5 pounds, 3 ounces of stubborn, beautiful life, a shock of dark hair, my nose, James's eyes. When they placed him on my chest, I whispered, "We made it, baby boy." Somehow we made it, but survival was still fragile. Ellen and Thomas moved to Arizona just 2 weeks later. Thomas had been offered work they couldn't refuse. "I'll send money when I can." Ellen promised, kissing Ethan goodbye. He's our connection to James. We'll never forget. And then, it was just me. Just me and a newborn. No family, no savings, no plan. But I had a promise. And I had a name for the child James gave me, Ethan. The days after James's funeral blurred into a loop of exhaustion and despair. I had nowhere permanent to live. Ellen and Thomas's guest room had been a gift, but now it was gone. The $3,000 from the hospital had gone faster than I expected. Baby clothes, diapers, formula, medical bills, gas. Ethan's cries were constant, piercing, a mix of hunger and the helplessness I was too afraid to admit I shared. I was sleeping in my car, a '97 Honda Civic with a broken passenger side window and a trunk full of our lives. I parked behind the hospital where James died. Somehow it felt safer there, like he was still watching over us. At night, I curled into the back seat with Ethan swaddled on my chest, whispering promises I had no clue how to keep. "You're safe. I'll figure this out. I swear, I had to." By day, I hunted for work. I was turned away over and over. No diploma, no references. We don't hire kids with babies. I was one rejection away from breaking when I walked into a grimy little place called Sunshine Diner on the edge of town. The woman behind the counter had thick gray curls and a voice like gravel. "You look half dead," she said bluntly. I nodded. I need anything. I'll work any shift." She sighed and slid a box of tissues across the counter. "I don't need your life story. Just don't steal from the register." Her name was Patty. She became my first real employer and, in her own rough way, a lifeline. I worked the breakfast rush, bussing tables and pouring coffee, while Ethan slept in a borrowed car seat beside the kitchen. At night, I stocked shelves at a corner store from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. The manager let me prop Ethan's carrier behind the counter. He never cried during those shifts, almost like he knew I couldn't handle one more thing going wrong. My body ached constantly. Sleep was a fantasy. I'd take 20-minute naps in the break room forehead on the table, dreams clouded with worry. One afternoon during a lull at the diner, a coworker named Melissa pulled me aside. She was 25, tattooed, sharp-tongued, and raising a 4-year-old daughter named Zoe. "You're sleeping in your car, aren't you?" she asked. I froze. "No, why would you think you've got a diaper bag in your trunk and you change shirts in the bathroom? Come on, Olivia, I'm not stupid." I looked away, ashamed. "You can't live like this, not with a baby." She didn't wait for me to answer. "I've got a couch. You're coming home with me tonight." I tried to protest. She waved me off, one mom helping another. "Don't make this weird." Melissa's apartment was tiny, one-bedroom with peeling paint and mismatched furniture. But to me, it was heaven. She and Zoe shared the bedroom. I got the couch. Ethan had a little corner crib Melissa found at a thrift store. There was no judgment in her voice when she handed me a warm bottle or shared her leftovers. Just matter-of-fact support, the kind I hadn't known since James died. For the first time in months, I didn't wake up wondering if I could survive the day. But that peace didn't last long. When Ethan was about 3 months old, he started crying uncontrollably, red-faced, high-pitched, inconsolable. His skin was hot, his fists clenched. No amount of rocking or singing could soothe him. I took his temperature. 103.3 Guffey. Panic gripped me. I packed him up and rushed to the car, but as soon as I turned the key, the engine made a horrible grinding sound, then died completely. Smoke curled from under the hood. No, 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 I whispered, hitting the steering wheel. Ethan whimpered in the back seat. I was stranded. No money, no phone data, no way to get help. That's when I broke. I put my head on the wheel and sobbed. Huge, shuddering sobs. The kind that come from someplace deep and animalistic. It wasn't just the car or the fever. It was everything. James was gone. My family had abandoned me. I was barely holding it together, and now the universe had pulled the last thread. Then I heard it, a tap on the window. Through blurry tears, I saw a familiar face, Olivia. It was Mrs. Rodriguez, my high school Spanish teacher. I was driving by and, "Are you okay?" she asked, peering in. I choked out the words, "My baby's sick. My car broke down. I was trying to get to the ER. She didn't ask any more questions, just opened her passenger door. "Get in," she said. "We're going." In the ER, doctors moved fast. Ethan had an ear infection that had spread. They said if I'd waited any longer, it could have reached his brain. While he was being treated, Mrs. Rodriguez Carmen sat beside me, listened as I poured out everything. About James, about the baby, about my parents and the church, about Melissa and the couch and the car that just gave up on us. She didn't flinch, didn't pity me, just held my hand and said, "You're staying with me now." I won't take no for an answer. Her house was a modest Cape-style home with a cozy, finished basement, carpeted clean with a private bathroom and a small daybed. A crib showed up 2 days later, assembled and ready. She called it her grand baby nook. That night, with Ethan breathing steadily beside me and a roof over our heads, I slept without fear for the first time in months. Carmen became more than a savior. She became family. "You're too smart for waitressing forever," she told me one night, passing me a bowl of arroz con pollo. "What about nursing school?" I laughed. "That dream died years ago." "It didn't die," she said. "It got delayed." And so began the next chapter. She helped me find online programs, filled out FAFSA forms, even babysat Ethan while I studied. I enrolled in a community college to complete my prerequisites. It was hard, so hard, but it wasn't hopeless anymore. The first day I wore scrubs that weren't part of a fast food uniform, I cried in the parking lot. It had taken nearly 4 years of juggling classes, diapers, flashcards, and Ethan's daycare drop-offs, but there I was, Olivia Jenkins, newly graduated, RN. Badge clipped to my chest, ready to start my first shift at Hartford Children's Hospital, the same hospital where James had spent his final days. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was walking into a place that once shattered me, now holding a stethoscope instead of sorrow. Ethan was 4 then, a bright-eyed, mop-haired little boy with a fascination for sounds. He banged pots to create rhythms, hummed lullabies in perfect pitch, and once asked if trees had a song. I worked nights in the pediatric oncology ward, the very wing where James had smiled through his pain. It was emotionally brutal, but I found a strange peace in it. Every child I cared for felt like honoring him. Every exhausted parent I comforted reminded me of myself. I never told them my full story, but I always understood more than I let on. Ethan grew up wandering those halls. Sometimes staff knew him by name. He'd draw pictures for the kids, leave paper cranes at the nurse's station, hum soft tunes while waiting for me to clock out. By age 6, his piano teacher, someone Carmen had found, pulled me aside. "I don't say this lightly," she whispered. "He's gifted. Not just talented, truly gifted." At first I was skeptical, but when I heard him compose a melody for his school's Thanksgiving pageant that made 3 teachers cry, I knew. It was James, in his fingers, in his instincts. Our boy was born to make music. I rearranged my shifts, took on extra weekend hours. Carmen and Melissa helped with pickups and practice runs. We scraped together tuition for the conservatory pre-program. Ethan never once complained about the old clothes or the off-brand cereal. He just played, joyously, relentlessly, like it filled his lungs with air. Meanwhile, I quietly moved up. By 27, I was supervising the oncology floor. By 30, I helped design a child comfort protocol that got published in a national journal. By 32, I had a team, a badge that read, Director of Pediatric Patient Support Services. And then there was the letter, a thick white envelope with a gold seal. It was from the Wilson Family Foundation, one of the largest philanthropic medical donors in the region. James's parents had created it in his honor. I hadn't heard from them in over a decade. Inside was a note, "We've followed Ethan's music, and yours. You made good on your promise. James would be proud. Enclosed is a trust we had set aside for your son, meant to be gifted when he turned 10. It was a trust fund, not massive, but enough to cover 10 years of conservatory training and private coaching. I wept holding it, because I had done it, without asking for help, without apologies, without compromise. Ethan's first major concert happened at age 12. Lincoln Center Student Spotlight. Carmen flew out. Melissa took a train. We all crammed into the second row like giddy teens. When he walked onto that stage, cello in hand, something in the audience stilled. He bowed, sat, closed his eyes, and then he played. The first note carried grief and hope. It wrapped around me like James's final hug. It sang of hospital nights, parking lot tears, fast food shifts, lullabies whispered in the dark. People rose to their feet before he finished. The piece was titled Safe Harbor. Ethan said it was for someone who carried me when I didn't know I was being carried. I nearly collapsed. Afterward, a music director from Juilliard approached me in the lobby. "Your son has something special," she said. "We'd like to meet." But while Ethan's world expanded, mine narrowed into something deeper. I used my salary bonus and a portion of James's PharmaLife settlement to start a small nonprofit, the James Wilson Foundation for Transitional Youth. We provided emergency housing for young parents kicked out of their homes, just like I had been. We helped with community college enrollment, therapy referrals, even car repairs. Because I remembered, every sleepless night, every cracked diaper cream lid, every judgmental whisper at the corner store. My pain had been recycled into purpose. One spring morning, Ethan and I sat on the back deck of our modest 2-story home, newly bought with my own name on the deed. He was 13 now, growing fast, voice deeper, but heart just as tender. He plucked chords on his guitar as I sipped coffee. "Mom," he asked. "Yeah, baby, do you think he would have liked my music? Everything I looked at him stunned by how much he resembled James. Now the eyes, the dimples, the quiet intensity. He would have loved you, I said. Not just your music. You. He nodded slowly. Sometimes I think he's still here, in little ways. I smiled through the ache. He's in every note you play. Ethan reached into his hoodie and pulled out something I hadn't seen in years, a worn velvet pouch. Inside the sapphire ring. I found this in your jewelry box. It's pretty. I took it gently. It still shimmered deep blue like a drop of sky. He gave me this when he found out I was pregnant, I said quietly. I kept it. But I wasn't ready to wear it. Ethan looked at it again, then at me. You should wear it now. That night, I slid the ring on. Not because I was still grieving, but because I had finally honored his wish to keep Ethan safe, to live boldly, and to build something lasting from our love. It was a Wednesday when the past found me. I was eating lunch at my desk, scrolling through my phone when my inbox pinged. The subject line said, "Your son, the composer, CBS Connecticut, wants to interview you." I blinked. Apparently, Ethan's Lincoln Center performance had made waves. A local reporter picked it up, then the state network followed. The article read, "At just 13, Ethan Jenkins Wilson is already redefining the next generation of classical musicians. Raised by a single mother and named after his late father, a leukemia patient, Ethan has transformed personal loss into extraordinary art." There was a photo. Me and Ethan cheek to cheek, taken by Carmen backstage that night. I didn't even know it had been shared. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I felt pride, yes, but also something else, dread. Because if I had seen it, so had they. It came just 3 days later, an email from Michael. Subject: Dad's not doing well. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Olivia? I know it's been a long time. I won't pretend we didn't fail you. But Dad had a mild stroke last week. He's asking to see you. And Ethan. Mom, too. We saw the news segment. He looks just like James. If you're willing, they'd like to talk. We'll be in Hartford through the weekend. Please let me know. Michael. I didn't respond right away. I couldn't. The words blurred. The air in my office felt suddenly too thick. I stood up and walked outside, heart thudding in my chest. I hadn't said their names out loud in years. Hadn't driven past the old neighborhood, hadn't checked their Facebooks, hadn't even whispered Dad. Since that night, he told me I had brought shame to his doorstep. But now, he wanted to see us. I waited until dinner to talk to Ethan. We were making pasta jazz music humming in the background. "Hey, kiddo," I said. "Got something to run by you." He looked up from the garlic bread he was over toasting. "Your uncle messaged me. Grandpa had a stroke. They saw the news. They want to meet." He blinked. "Grandpa?" "Yeah," I said softly. "My dad." Ethan paused. "I don't know them." I know I said. "They've never reached out. Not once. But now." He nodded slowly. "Do you want to go?" I was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't know what I want. Part of me wants to scream. The other part wonders if maybe you should see where I came from. See for yourself." He set down the bread and came over, wrapping his arms around me. "Whatever you want, I'm with you," he said. "But if they hurt you again, I'm walking out." I laughed, tears brimming. Deal. That Saturday, I stood outside the house I once called home. It looked the same. White shutters, brick steps, rhododendrons just starting to bloom. Ethan stood beside me, straight-backed, holding a cello case. He had insisted on bringing it, even though I told him it wasn't a performance. He had smiled, just in case. Michael opened the door. Older, paler, but the same kind eyes. He stepped out, visibly nervous. "Liv," he said. I froze at the sound of that name. No one had called me that in over a decade. He didn't go for a hug, he just stood there waiting like he didn't want to assume anything. Behind him, I saw them. Mom, thinner, grayer, wearing a cardigan I remembered from my senior year. Dad seated on the couch cane by his side, oxygen tube in his nose. The air inside was thick with awkward silence. We stepped in. Every step felt like crossing lava. Mom stood. She stared at Ethan first, and her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. He looks just like James." Ethan gave a small, polite nod. "Hello?" Dad coughed. "Come sit," he rasped. We sat across from them. No one spoke for a full minute. Then finally, my father spoke. "I was wrong," he said, voice rough. "So wrong. I threw you out for loving someone, for giving life, while he was losing his." I felt my throat close. He continued. "I thought I was protecting our values, but I was just afraid of judgment, of shame, and I chose pride over my own daughter." I blinked back tears, my hands clenched. "I missed your entire life," he said. "Missed meeting this boy. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking you anyway, both of you." Ethan looked at me, then at him. "Do you love her now?" he asked simply. Dad's lips trembled. "I never stopped. I just buried it under expectations. I was wrong." Mom stepped forward then. In her hand was a small box. "I kept this," she whispered, holding it out. I opened it. Inside was a tiny blue hat, the one from the hospital when Ethan was born. "I followed your nursing milestones online," she said. "I donated anonymously to the foundation. Twice. I just didn't know how to face you." My voice was hoarse. "Then why did it take so long?" She nodded slowly. "Because guilt ages you into cowardice." We didn't stay long. Ethan played one soft piece before we left an improvised lullaby. He said it was for lost years. As we stepped back onto the porch, Dad called after us. "Olivia." I turned. "That ring. Is that the one James gave you?" I nodded. He smiled faintly. "Good. It suits you now." 3 months passed after that reunion. We didn't rush into anything. No dramatic family dinners, no forced holidays, just a slow thawing like spring after a long, brutal winter. It started with letters. My mother wrote one to Ethan, handwritten, 4 pages. She told him about her own childhood in a strict Irish Catholic household, how fear had shaped the way she parented. She didn't justify, only explained. She ended it with a simple request. "If you ever feel ready, I'd love to hear you play in person again," Ethan wrote back, short but kind. He thanked her for the honesty, said he'd think about it. My father sent books history volumes, mostly with sticky notes marking passages. Thought Ethan might enjoy these. The first one arrived with a note: "I never said I was proud of you, but I am. Fiercely." Ethan placed the books on a shelf labeled Cautious Curiosity. And me, I began seeing a therapist again. I realized I couldn't rebuild with them if I didn't first process the wreckage they left behind. It wasn't about forgetting. It was about choosing what kind of legacy I wanted to pass on to my son. By fall, I invited them to a small recital at Juilliard's youth program. Ethan was performing one of his original pieces. He called it Legacy. Before the performance, he handed me a folded paper. "Wait to open it until after I play," he said. I nodded, tucking it into my pocket. The hall was intimate, only about 100 seats. My parents sat near the back. Carmen was beside them, and Melissa came too still, wearing her trademark oversized scarf and coffee thermos. I squeezed both their hands before taking my place up front. When Ethan stepped onto the stage in his black button-down and blue lace shoes, the audience hushed. He didn't speak, just nodded once and raised his bow. The music began slow, gentle like a lullaby. Then it swelled strings, rising with fierce emotion, dipping into something fragile and beautiful. I felt my chest tighten. The melody told a story. I could hear it in the phrasing. The grief of a boy never held by his father. The resilience of a mother who refused to break. The quiet return of something lost and maybe found again. When it ended, there was a pause, a collective breath held in the room. Then the applause erupted. Ethan stood, gave one graceful bow, and walked straight to me. Now he said, "You can open it?" I unfolded the note with trembling fingers. It was just one sentence. "Thank you for choosing me when everyone else left." Later that night, after hugs and photos, after awkward but sincere compliments from my parents, Ethan and I sat on the roof of our brownstone under string lights. You did it, I told him. He shrugged, smiling. We did it. I looked at him. This boy, born from both love and grief. He had James's eyes, but his own quiet wisdom. His music had already reached more people than I ever could. And yet he still came home every night and asked if I wanted to watch cartoons or order Thai food. Do you hate them? He asked softly, referring to my parents. I shook my head. I don't forgive them easily, I said, but I don't want to be consumed by them either. I want my life to be mine, not theirs to define. He nodded. I get that. He leaned against me, head on my shoulder. You know what's wild? What if James hadn't gotten sick? You two might have gone to California, right? Started a new life. Probably, I said, staring at the sky. Maybe I would have never gone into medicine. Never had to fight this hard, and I wouldn't be here. My breath caught. He was right. All those years I'd cursed fate, begged to trade my loss for a do-over. I never considered this version of the timeline, the one where everything hurt and yet still bloomed. The James Wilson Foundation grew fast after that. A national magazine picked up our story. We raised enough to fund 5 new grants for pediatric cancer patients and single mothers pursuing healthcare degrees. I became chief nursing officer at the hospital where Ethan was born, yes, the very one where I once handed out discharge instructions. Melissa opened her 3rd coffee shop. Carmen finally took a sabbatical to write her memoirs. And Ethan, he got into Juilliard full-time at 16. And every single concert ticket I ever handed out said the same thing in honor of James, who gave us music, and Olivia, who gave it wings. Last Christmas, my parents came to our house for dinner. We kept things simple, roast chicken apple pie, no expectations. But something had shifted. After dessert, my mother asked Ethan if she could hear him play one more piece. He looked at me, then nodded. He sat at the piano and began something soft, something I didn't recognize. When it ended, my father was silent for a long time. Then he turned to me and said, "You made a life out of ashes, and you did it without us. I don't deserve a place in your home, but I'm grateful you let me sit at your table." I didn't reply. I just reached across and placed the sapphire ring on the table between us, not as a gift, not as a symbol of peace, but as a reminder that what we build with love outlasts what we lose from fear.